Hello everyone, I've found an incredible game today, probably one that you've never seen before, probably the greatest game you've never seen, I'd like to say. And this is between Tony Miles and John Nunn, and this game was played in 1969 in the under-18 BCF championships. Now you all know Tony Miles is a great player, who was the first Englishman to actually get the Grandmaster title. And of course John Nunn is also a famous chess player, widely known for his problem-solving skills and his many books that he's published. So Tony Miles is white, John Nunn is black, and the game starts with e4. Nunn plays e5, knight f3 is played, knight c6, and Miles now plays bishop to c4, a very active move. Knight f6 is played, and here I've just put a few arrows here in green. So traditionally, typical moves in this position are castles, knight c3, d3, or knight to g5. And here Tony Miles played the fourth most popular move, which is now d4, striking straight away in the centre. Black takes on d4, and already we've got quite an interesting game. White could opt for e5 here, but after d5 it seems that black may have a slight edge in this opening. After bishop b5 in this variation, things get really complicated after black plays knight to e4. This is because after white takes on d4, the knight on c6 is pinned, but now black can play an amazing move bishop c5, eyeing up this f2 pawn with the bishop and knight. And if knight takes c6 here, black can play an intermezzo move, bishop takes f2 check, king f1, and b takes c6. And this is a very interesting position, just because after white takes on c6 with check, after king f8, black's actually threatening to play bishop to a6 and threatening to win the queen, or checkmate the white king. And now there's a bit of a dance, so white can't take the rook on a8 yet, they have to play queen to d3 to stop bishop to a6. But now black can play bishop to f5, threatening to play knight g3 with check, a discovered attack on the queen. So queen f3 is forced, attacking the bishop on f5. The bishop retreats to d7 and once again threatens moves like bishop to b5 check. So with the bishop on c6 moves, black can play bishop b5. And here white's best move is to play e6. So obviously threatening to play queen takes f7 checkmate, so bishop takes e6 is forced. And after bishop takes a8, queen takes a8. This position is actually given by Stockfish 10 as dead equal. So black's actually the exchange down, but also a pawn up. But I think it's equal due to white's terrible king position. And in all honesty, I probably prefer to play black here, so maybe this is why Tony Miles didn't go in for the position here. Maybe this is why I didn't play e5. It just leads to a lot of very complicated positions. Instead, Miles played a logical move, just castling. So, not taking the d4 pawn yet. Nunn plays bishop c5, protecting d4, hanging onto the pawn. But now Miles plays e5, so he's striking in the centre, attacking the knight on f6. And I think moving this knight to g4 would not be the best of moves. And I think white could continue with bishop to f4 here. If black castles, white can play h3, and the knight's forced to knight h6. And white could even take and double black's h-pawns. Not a great position for black to be in. So after e5, the best move for black is actually to play d5, is what John Nunn played, hitting the bishop on c4. If white plays en passant in this position, I think black is fine. Just after castles, d takes c7 and queen takes c7, black's got a very nice position. And actually shouldn't have any issues developing, let's say bishop to g4, and maybe even put the rooks in the centre of the board. After d5 though, now Miles took on the knight on f6, e takes f6. And of course black takes the bishop on c4. F takes g7 may have been an option here, but I think after rook g8, black sort of gets away. After rook e1 check and bishop e6, it may be that black's over the worst of it. So instead of taking it on g7, Miles played rook to e1 check. And Nunn now blocked with bishop to e6. Miles continued his attack with knight to g5, hitting the bishop twice. And Nunn now played a very solid move, queen to d5, defending the bishop on e6 and bringing their queen into the centre of the board. But here Miles actually played a really clever developing move with knight to c3, hitting the queen on d5. And black now has to be very careful. If black takes a knight on c3, white can play queen takes d5, and the bishop on e6 is pinned, and white's just won the queen. Black also has to be very careful about retreating his queen backwards. For instance, if queen d6, white can play f takes g7, hitting the rook, and once rook g8 is played, white can play knight takes e6. And if black recaptures with f takes, then the queen h5 comes with check, and the point is after king d7, white can now play knight to e4, hitting the queen and the bishop at the same time, and also threatening knight to f6 check. So if queen e7, white can just play knight takes c5 with check, and the queen is now protecting the knight on c5, and white's just won a piece. And again in this position, if black plays queen to d7, white actually has a very crafty move in knight to e4. The point being that the knight now attacks the bishop on c5, but also threatens to play knight to f6 once f takes g7 is played. For instance, if bishop to b6, white can play f takes g7, and knight to f6 is coming on the next move, or g takes the rook is coming too. So white has very crafty moves in this position. But fortunately Nunn found the best move. He played queen to f5, the safest option. But Miles continues to harass the black position. He plays knight c to e4, hitting the bishop on c5, forcing Nunn to make a choice with his bishop now. Does he leave it on the a3 to f8 diagonal, or retreat it to b6? Well, in the game Nunn decided that bishop b6 was the best option. But Miles now continues his attack further. He takes on g7, hitting the rook, and then rook moves to g8. And Miles is just absolutely unrelenting in this game. He now further attacks black's position with g4. And the point is, if queen takes g4 here, then queen recaptures, the bishop recaptures, and at the end of this variation, white has knight to f6, check, winning the rook or the bishop, and the rook on e1 is also checking the king on e8. So after g4, black still has to be very careful and guard this f6 square because the knight is also ready to jump into it. So basically the only move for black is queen g6, and that's what Nunn played in the game. So in this game, Miles is basically giving black no time to defend here. His next move is a trade. He takes on the bishop on e6 with the knight, he recaptures, and now Miles stops Nunn from castling. He plays bishop to g5. In the game, Nunn played h6 here, but rook g7 was also an option, taking this pesky pawn off. White would have had to follow up with queen to f3 though, with knight to f6 ideas. And here Stockfish gives e5 as a good move for black. And the point is that white's attack sort of runs out of steam. After knight to f6, there are several moves black can play here. King e7 was one option, but actually h4 is considered a very strong move now because knight to h5 is threatened with check and the bishop is protected on g5. Black can try moves like h6 to dismantle this bishop, but then knight g8 double check, and king d7, knight takes h6 can be played, and white still has a decent attack here. In fact, the computer actually gives king to d8 as the best move here, so staying on the same diagonal as his bishop on g5. And for demonstration purposes, knight to h5 obviously can't be played here with check because then queen takes the bishop. So instead, white has to play knight takes h7 with check, king c8, and white can play queen f8, but this actually leads to a drawn position. After king d7, knight to f6 and king e6. White can take the rook on a8, but black has enough of an initiative here. Queen takes g5, queen takes b7, and after knight to e7, knight to e4, queen takes g4, knight g3, this position is given as dead equal. The material is equal, and it seems as though white's attack has fizzled out. So maybe in this position Nunn should have taken the pawn with the rook. Instead though, in this game he played h6, hitting the bishop on g5. But now Miles just ignores this. He plays queen to f3, preparing knight f6 check. And again black could take on g7 with the rook, And after knight to f6 we get into a familiar position, but king f7 is considered the best move now. But white can simply sidestep everything with bishop to h4. But amazingly, black has a really nice move actually here. You can block everything with queen f5 because that pawn on g4 is pinned. Queen g2 sort of reignites this threat with g takes the queen. But now knight to e5 is given as a very good move. This is because after takes on f5, black can throw in knight to f3, king f1 and rook takes g2. This is a very complex position. F takes e6 can be played with check, and after king g6 takes on g2, black can take on the bishop on h4 with check. The king can move to h3, knight to f3, e7 from white. Black takes the rook recaptures, and black's now forced to take the knights. White can get a queen and trade the rooks, so white's up an exchange, but black has an extra pawn. But white is clearly better in this endgame. So again, rook takes g7 could have been played by black, so maybe Nunn should have played this in the game. It leads to a lot of complications, and I doubt both players could have been 100% accurate in that position. But in the game, Nunn played h takes g5, taking the bishop, and actually now Miles just finishes off black. He plays knight f6 check. The king moves to f7, and there's an amazing move that Miles now plays. Interestingly, all other moves for white lose in this position. So I wonder if you can spot what white's next move is. Maybe it's good to pause the video or just wait for 5 seconds and I'll reveal the answer. So here, Miles amazingly played rook takes e6. The point being that now white can suddenly play moves like queen d5 and start threatening black's king really nicely. In the game, Nunn captured the rook on e6, but this just leads to mate for white now. White can play rook e1 check. Nunn blocks with knight to e5, but now just queen d5, and actually black resigned in this position. This is because wherever black moves next, the queen is going to take on e5 with a check, and there's going to be a mate in a matter of moves. For instance, if king takes the knight, queen takes e5, king f7, and queen e7 is checkmate. So again, after queen d5, black could also play king to e7, but then just queen takes e5 once again, and if king d8, queen d5, the king's forced to c8, and the queen can take g8 with check. The last move is queen to e8, and of course white can just take with checkmate. So this was a very short and sweet game for Tony Miles. I'm hoping to cover more games of his in the future. He has a very exciting and attacking style, and is considered to be quite a maverick and just a very strong English player, one of the best that we've ever seen. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the analysis of this game. Please drop me a like, comment or subscribe to the channel if you want to watch more chess videos in the future, and I'll see you in the next video.